Okay, for a moment.
This is Maisie.
Yeah, this is Maisie.
Say hello, Maisie.
Absolutely, absolutely.
She's my little care dog who keeps me good company and loves my friends, particularly Suzanne.
Exactly, exactly. So now we're going to talk about, one of what you've had a few loves in your life, and we're going to take them one at a time. We're trying to do things in chronological order. So we're starting with Jan, who was the first love of your life. So
Well, I had a few little schoolhouse crushes.
Okay, well, we can talk about them first then.
Well, they all were ranch boys, interestingly enough. And my first crush that I remember was in 5th grade. And his name was Kirk Dahl. And he was brother to Craig, who was the boy who was a year older and thought that I was going to be his future wife and it all. But Kirk and he was the first one that I wrote little notes to and would pass back and forth through school. Mm-hmm. And I would hide his notes to me in my little doll cradle. And I remember hiding that in the dust can. Mama used to get these special dust cloths, and she didn't put them back in the dust can, or I had the old dust can. Anyway, I had a dust can and saved these love notes. And in Dallas or Vanna, I think Vanna knew that I had these stashed away, and those two got into it and read the notes and teased me mercilessly on these notes. And I was so affronted that they would invade my privacy. Anyway, it's interesting how I still have affection for Kirk. We were just young little shits. In fact, that's the year in 5th grade that Reed came into my life. So that's an interesting. Mrs. McGargle was our teacher. She was also my very favorite teacher in all of the school years, as opposed to Mr. Harper, who was the principal of high school, who used to tease me and embarrass me to no end. Oh, I did not like that man, and to this day I still don't. I thought he was a beast, and certainly not fit to be a principal of high school. He taught one of the classes to those of us who showed promise, in other words, who were in the Honor Society, and I was in the Honor Society because of my grades. So was Jan. But Jan wasn't there because of his scholastic ability. He was there because he read these books and also could carry on a wonderful conversation regarding these books. But one time in class, I was wearing one of my sister's dresses. It was a pink dress, and it had a little bit of a scoop neckline to it. And Mr. Harper was in front of the class, and he stopped his
lecture.
Thank you, lecture, and said, "Helen, did you ever have a broken collarbone?" And I was just so taken back. I went, "No." I wasn't even for sure certain what my collarbone was. I had a bunch of broken bones, but collarbone wasn't yet. I had a broken collarbone later, but not then. I was so embarrassed. I just could stammer and stutter. No. Well, you sure look like you had a broken collarbone. I don't know. They're not very prominent. Anyway, he did. And then when my father was killed, he used to harass me mercilessly in the hall or in class or whatever. And one time he got on me in the hall, and Benna came out of the classroom and saw me crying. And she knew that I was not very happy with Mr. Harper. And so Venna came up to me and she said, Helen, why are you crying? I said, Mr. Harper. She grabbed my hand, bless her heart, and was tugging me literally into Mr. Harper's office. And you only go into Mr. Harper's office if you were a bad girl. I wasn't a bad girl. I was a sad girl. And she stomped in there and she says, you stop being mean to my sister. And I went, I mean, Vanna.
She was a strong woman.
Yes, it still is to a degree, especially with what's happened in her life. But I was so proud of her to stand up, and could love her more, you know, for protecting me. And I remember what I was wearing then even. It was one of her sweaters and skirts. It was a green sweater with a shawl collar and a pleated skirt that had that same green in and brown and a little orange, definitely fall colors. And both of them came from the Pendleton Wool Man, who would stop by the ranch with these huge containers full of coats and blankets and skirts and sweaters and all things wool. And one of the family's favorite blankets was from the Pendleton Man, and it used to be Mom and Daddy's blanket. I don't know who has that. I think one of Rolf's kids have it.
Great.
Because Rolf got it, and then it was given to one of his children when he died. So I digress. Anyway, back to Mr. Harper's office. I can remember him really back on his heels going, no, nobody dared talk to him like that. I don't think even his wife dared chastise him. Venna wouldn't let up, and she said, you tell her you're sorry and that you won't do it again. Yeah. And he says, well, I'm sorry. I didn't know I was hurting her. Well, look at her, she said.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, bless Venna's heart.
Yeah. So did he back off after that?
Yes.
Yeah.
In fact, there were several times that I was so sad and so beyond myself that one of my classmates actually gave me the keys to his truck, his blue Ford truck, and said, Helen, just get out of here. And so I did. I disappeared for a couple of hours or so.
Wow.
Like even drive up to Angel Lake, for heaven's sake. And he didn't stop me. I took advantage of that too.
Yeah, I bet. But let's talk about Jan.
Oh, Jan. Well,
how did you meet Jan?
I was in 8th grade when I first laid eyes on Jan. And I had, my desk was by the windows in the classroom. And I would tend to daydream and look out the windows a lot, especially if it was way boring. Or I would sometimes get through with the lessons faster than the rest of the class. And so would entertain myself looking at those beautiful Ruby Mountains that were almost always laden with snow. And there was always goings on underneath. It was up on the 2nd floor, my classroom, and there was the baseball diamond, and then a little further off was the football field, and so there were always activities going on, and so I'd watch. Well, one day I was doing my daydreaming, and here comes this guy who had on a beautiful cowboy hat and, of course, cowboy boots and Levi's, and he had a white shirt on. And I was so taken by that individual. It was like my energy went boom to that person. And I just couldn't take my eyes off him, and I didn't recognize him. And hell, I knew almost everybody in Elko County, much less in town or the ranches, and I didn't recognize him at all. So I started asking behind me, do you know who that is? Do you know who that is? And one of his cousins, fortunately, was sitting to my side. And I asked Peggy, who I didn't have much respect for, but that's another story. I asked Peggy, and she got up of her chair or desk and looked at, oh, that's my cousin Jan. And I knew I needed to know that guy. Somehow I had some connection with this guy. Had no idea what, where, or why. But I can honestly say I was in love at first sight. He was such an imposing figure, and he walked with such a stride, and he had his head up, and he dressed just like how I love a cowboy to look. And let's see, I had to be almost 14. Oh, closer to 15, maybe, between that age. And so I was interested in boys then anyway. And Craig Dahl was chasing me. So, and I had dates with Craig, but it was like, I'll meet you at the church and, kind of thing. We'll do our thing there and we'll go home with the family kind of stuff. So, anyway, I kept my eye on this guy, and he was walking over to the high school to register for school that fall. And so I kept my eye on him that whole school year. And he was very popular, to say the least. The girls, especially the trashy ones, that I didn't have much good to say about. I kept in tabs on him, especially from Peggy, like who's he going out with and what is he doing, et cetera, et cetera. And also, our class had to run up to the high school for a class, and I'll be damned if I can remember what class that was for, but it was right after lunchtime. And so as soon as I ate my sack lunch, I would dash up to the high school, and they had coat racks along the hall and also lockers for their books and things. But everybody would sit on, there was a little bit of a level up where the coat racks were, and everybody sat there and sort of watched people go by. So as fast as I could, I'd eat my sack lunch and hustle up to the high school, and I'd be dragging some friends along with me. Why are we in a hurry? And I did because I wanted to watch this interesting individual. Well, lo and behold, who should have a mad crush on me but Jan's older cousin, Lance.
Oh, dear.
And Lance was 3.5 years older than I, and he was in Dallas's class and was a senior. And he always wanted to talk to me. And he was the class, no, not the class, he was the school nerd. In fact, he was brilliant. And he turned out to be a nuclear physicist.
Wow.
And traveled to every nuclear plant, is that what they call them?
Nuclear power plant.
Power plant around the world.
Wow.
Including Chernobyl.
Wow.
And several times, even after it blew up, they called Lance in to see, what are we going to do? Mm-hmm. And brilliant guy. And Lance so wanted to talk to me, and I didn't want to talk to him because Lance kind of fell over his feet. He was kind of like a galoot, Uh, he dressed as his mother dressed him, and it wasn't the in thing, and
He wasn't a cowboy.
he was not a cowboy at all. Though his father had a neighboring ranch in the O'Neill Basin too, but he was not a cowboy at all. Sweet, sweet guy, tender sweetheart. But he would come up to me and try to talk to me, and I was always there early, and he would hurry and eat his lunch and come back to school to try to see me. And he scared me at first so badly that my only refuge would be to run to the girls' room. And by damn, one time he followed me into the girls' restroom. And the girls, Lance, what are you doing here? Oh, I talked to Helen. Never mind that there were girls. Oh, dear, bless his heart. And to this day, dear Lance keeps
track of you.
Track of me. Yeah, every once in a while I'll get some flowers.
Aww.
And he married a gal from Chile, and I think, have had a happy enough marriage. I really do. Olga is an interesting gal, but they're in love. And in fact, they celebrated their 25th anniversary with me on the deck.
Sweet.
Yeah, it was really sweet. And so, anyway,
Jan.
Yes. I just became a freshman. So I was in high school all the time. No, I was just not quite, because Lance was still a senior. Somehow, Lance asked me to go with him in his own little funny Nash car. They don't make those anymore. And it was an interesting little car. It looked much like a VW, tiny little thing. Everybody laughed at it, but it was a neat little car. But it was it was dressed out like the guys then were raising the back of the car, and they had a foxtail. I mean, it was high fawns all the way, Anyway, he asked me to go with him to a basketball game to Montello, which was a little railroad town in the boondocks. Literally, it was Oasis was the town I was trying to remember. You drove over the Pequot Mountains, down the hill, turned at Oasis, and drove out into the desert. And then by the railroad tracks, about 20 miles or so, was this little railroad town. And they had a basketball team. And Jan was on the basketball team. And I can remember talking to Daddy and Mama with every ammunition I had to let me go with Lance to Metropolis. No, not Metropolis, to Montello to watch this ball game. Well, I had no interest at all in going with Lance, except that I would be more, Jan would see me more. And I had hopes that maybe I would be introduced to Jan. And as it was, Jan and Lance were rooming together because their ranches were too far out to drive back and forth all the time. They were about 2.5 hours out from any part of civilization. Anyway, I got to go. And Lance had told me, Jan had asked him, well, who is this girl that you're so interested in? And because Lance would call me on the phone once in a blue moon out to the ranch, and Jan would be sitting there, and of course there wasn't much to say. I was just trying to be nice to him, and like, how was your test with chemistry? And well, lo and behold, instead of taking the school bus back to town, Jan drove back with Lance and I. I was
In heaven.
in heaven, absolutely in heaven. And poor Lance, I was talking with Jan all the time. And then I remember, oh yeah, I'm with Lance. I have a date with Lance. And so I tried to bring Lance in the conversation a little bit. But he was driving, and he was a horrible driver. I prayed that I'd get home safely. And Jan would say, Lance, stay in the lane. And it was a gravel road, and he would go too fast, and sometimes you would skid out, especially if you were going too fast. It was a scary ride, but I still was in heaven. And I was too young to date with Jan officially, and Jan was dating other girls too, and but he noticed me. And he would say hi to me when the rest of the school year, when my tongue would be hanging out as he walked by. And he wore Wrangler jeans, and they fit him beautifully. So I knew he had junk in his trunk. But I was a good little Mormon girl, so I wasn't supposed to notice such things. And he always wore white undershirts. Once in a blue moon, he would wear a shirt, but that was in a blue moon. There had to be a special occasion or some sort. And he was always well manicured and always had the most interesting cowboy boots. And he always wore boots that nobody else had. And he was the front runner of unusual skins, like ostrich skin and buffalo skin. And golly, he had snakeskin boots, always. And the reason why he couldn't wear regular shoes, because he had really high arches. And boots were the only thing that were made to fit. Mm-hmm. And he was a cowboy. Mm-hmm. Too. So I became a freshman, and I would ask him out when it was girls' choice. Mm-hmm. And he found me kind of interesting. And then my father was killed. And I remember not seeing him during the funeral, of course, or the viewing, but I remember seeing him standing by the gate of the cemetery. He came for that. And he also kind of knew that my father was not too happy about me asking him out. Daddy knew who he was, of course, and Daddy hated one of Jan's other cousins, who also was in Dallas's class. His name was Horace Agee, and Daddy just thought he was the most despicable human being on the planet. And Varl had so much hair, you couldn't even get a comb through it, and it came really low on his forehead. So, and in those days they was it mallets? Is that
mullets?
Mullets. Mm-hmm. Well, Varl tried to do a mullet, but of course it didn't quite work because of his thick hair. So he looked a little bit like a bushman, for sure. And he dressed like one too. And Varl was absolutely a wild boy. There's no question about it. And my father and Dad said something to him once, because Daddy was always at the school functions. One, because Dallas was playing basketball, and us girls were always involved in something or other. And Daddy liked to be present for us kids. And Varl had said something that really my father thought was out of line. And so that I should be dating an Agee who was related to this obnoxious, terrible, awful kid was just beyond him. So when I started dating him on these girl nights, my father would notice when the car lights pulled in, and if we were more than 10 minutes, he started flipping the porch lights off and on. Get your butt in here, Helen. Daddy was not too pleased about that, but to see Jan standing at the gate at the funeral, at the cemetery, really meant a lot to me. And he came up to where the gravesite was and gave me a hug and told me how sorry he was and that was there anything he could do to help. And he was a real sweetheart during that time, really sensitive, and started paying more attention to me, actually. And then with Daddy out of the picture, I felt much more at ease to go out with him because I didn't have to ask for a girls' dance. He could ask me and I could go. Mama wasn't too happy because she would say to me, "You know how your father felt, Helen." And so I still had a bunch of hassle to go with Jan. Jan wasn't a Mormon, but he would come to Mutual for me. And whenever he would come, he came to one sacrament meeting, but that was all he needed. And we would talk religion. And of course, all I knew really was just Mormonism. And he was talking all about these theological thoughts. And I'm going, I've never heard of these things. Well, they're wrong. Of course they're wrong because Mormonism is the only true church. We had many discussions about that. And that was also in the way we both knew of any possibility of getting married, because there would be no way in hell he would go through the temple, and you'd have to be a Mormon of good standing to do that. And he was drinking and smoking cigars and going with wild women.
Yeah.
And he enjoyed those wild women. In fact, that's a little bit of an interesting story. When he was of a certain age whereby his father felt that he needed to know the ways of women, gave his son enough money to go to the house of ill repute with his son and talked to the madam and said, basically, teach my son the ways of women. And they did a fine job.
We are so grateful to those wonderfully wise women.
And that really sealed my affection for Jan. I mean, when that came into the mix, and he could not touch me for years. We could kiss passionately, but they could not go any further than that. No way, Jose. But he wore me down.
It took years, but he wore you down.
He did. And what's so funny about that, too, the funny is on me, that having grown up with Venna, who at like 12 years old was wearing a 36D, and I was stuffing my bra with Dallas's socks. You know, I just had a terrible inferiority complex about not being adequate. And even when we started to fool around, I wouldn't take my blouse off, much less my bra.
There were socks in there.
There were socks in there. Just as a side note, growing up, Wells decided to build a little swimming pool. And once in a blue moon, we were allowed to go swimming one afternoon in Wells, and it didn't have a heater. The water wasn't heated, so it was the snow melt water. It was colder in a well that it was so cold. Never mind, we would jump in and swim around. And I had Celia's blue suit. And it was the typical drape kind of thing and down past your hips kind of thing. But it had a bra in it. And of course, my little boobies were inadequate to fill that. So I went to Dallas's sock drawer and got socks so I could look good in that swimming suit. Well, Venna and I were swimming around, and I happened to notice some boys were playing with some socks. Oh my gosh, I lost my boobs. Oh, I was so embarrassed, but nobody knew. Venna, I don't think even knew that I was stuffing my boobies. Anyway, I got over that, thank heavens. But towards the end of high school, Jen was my main squeeze, and I was his main squeeze. Except some nights when we weren't together. I understand that he had other entertainment. We won't go there.
Yeah.
Suzanne, just hit talk and let it and put it down. It'll eventually stop. I just noticed looking at the video that you can see my gray hair.
Yeah, keep talking about Jan.
Oh yeah, Jan. Oh well, he's always with me. So anyway, even when he graduated, he was a year ahead of me, and a year and a half older actually. But that had to do with his own schooling and his parents' inability to have school for him. But finally, they moved from Minden. His father worked for the soil conservation, interestingly enough. And when Jan's grandfather died, he gave the 5 ranches that he owned in the O'Neill Basin to each one of his sons. And Jan's father, being the eldest, got the home ranch. And that's when Jan moved out to the O'Neill Basin, which was miles and miles away from civilization. But there was a family who happened to be a Mormon family who lived in the edge of Metropolis, which was another valley, Ranch Valley, and right on the edge of the O'Neill Basin. They were doing homeschooling. And so Jan's mother arranged for Jan to join this homeschooling family. And Jan was just in grammar school, young, 8, 9 years old. And his mom and dad would put him on a horse early Monday morning. And Jan rode to this ranch, and it was easily 20 miles through no road, rough mountains, hills, everything. I mean, it was wild country. This little whippersnapper had no problem. He loved it. And he would stay with that family until Friday and school was out. And he would ride back and spend Saturday and Sunday with his family and get on the horse and go back. And his Aunt June never forgave Jan's parents for letting that little guy ride the horse through that wild country in the winter. I mean, anything could have happened. I mean, there were mountain lions and bobcats and snakes and everything that's bad in Nevada roamed that country. But Jan loved it. He loved the freedom and that was part of his independence, in developing his independence and also his lack of fear. He wasn't afraid of anything, much like my dad, actually. And he reminded me of my father an awful lot. Jan was tall. He was at least 5'5" and built like Adonis, even as a teenager.
You mean 6'5"?
Oh, yes. Thank
Because
you.
he's tall. Yeah.
Very tall.
Yeah.
And built like Adonis. And he towered over everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I think Mr. Harper, the principal, didn't get on him, because Jan would only come to school when he wanted to. You didn't see him very often at school in the morning, but you did in the afternoon, because he'd sleep in. And he got away with it. And Jan was smart. He kept up with all of his schooling, but he had terrible penmanship. I have to say, when he would write me letters, I'd have to guess what the word was. His spelling was awful too. He just didn't have interest, which was interesting because he read so much, and you would think, but he just didn't care about. He knew what the word was and what it meant. Anyway, where was I?
So when you were in high school together, and you were finishing up high school.
Yeah, right.
And he was already a year and a half older.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So he would still come to town. He by then was rodeoing because his best friend was a couple years older than he, and DeMar liked to rodeo with Jan. One, because Jan was such an excellent rider, and he rode both bareback and saddle bronc, which are the roughest other than bulls. And he would ride a bull every now and again too. But he would come to town and take me to the important dances and events and things. And he would call at the ranch and visit with me if he was out of town, or even if he was in town. I'd try to call, and his dear grandma Agee was still alive, and she would fix dinners for him now and again. And in her apartment, his grandfather built an apartment house in Wales, and in its day it was very fancy, but in Jan's day it was already getting to be pretty well beat up. But his grandmother would fix dinner for him when she was able to. She made the best steak. I ate with him once. Anyway, I would call him to let him know something or other, and she would answer the phone. It would ring and ring and ring. She would finally answer, and I was so sorry that I'd have to bother her, and I'd have to talk really loudly. And most of the time when I called Jan, I'd be in the pantry so nobody could hear my conversation. It had a long cord on it. So I'd have to say, "Can I please talk to Jan?" Because she couldn't hear. And of course, then the family knew that I was on the phone talking to Jan. And so after a few minutes, "Helen, get off the phone. You've been on the phone too long." Anyway, and he would call me too on occasion too. So I started sewing for him Western shirts, and he would pick out the fabric, and it would always be outrageous fabric. And he started wearing Western vests, more outrageous than the shirts. He picked out a cotton that was white with dollar size pink polka dots. He was so proud of that shirt. And of course, he got teased about that, but that's exactly what he wanted, the scamp. And then with his vest, the vest always had some very unusual fabric in the front, and then the back would be a plain color of some sort. And he picked out the most gorgeous fabric one day for his vest. It was a black satin, but it had velvet flowers on it. So it was a black background, and one of the flowers was a bright red poppy, and then there was orange and a yellow flower. I mean, you saw that coming, especially with Jan wearing it. He loved that. He'd wear that to our dances and stuff, especially if we went to a dance that you dressed up on. You would wear that under his suit. It was fun sewing for him, and uh, I was really happy to have him try. And of course, I had to alter the pattern because he didn't have any waist and the broadest of shoulders and long arms. And I made just tons and tons of shirts and dresses for him. In fact, he wouldn't wear anything but what I made for him. He would say, one, because of the fit, and he always loved him tapered. He wanted to emphasize his physique. And he got a lot of compliments and certainly comments on him. And he always wore them for sure in the rodeo arena.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And when he wasn't rodeoing, he'd wear them still, but he'd try to save them for the important events.
So now you kind of broke the rules on a lot of levels, because when you got out, I mean, you ended up moving in with Jan, right?
No, Jan would come to visit.
Oh, so Jan would just come to visit. So, okay, all right.
No,
you did the propriety thing.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
But he was there.
Yes. Oh, yes. But the longest would be like for 2 weeks or so.
Yeah. But still, back then, for you to have somebody at your house for 2 weeks.
Oh, heavens.
I mean,
that was a story. Big damn deal. Yeah. There's one thing I want to relate about Ross. Jan. Jan.
First, we're going with Jan. We're doing Jan first. We'll get to Ross in a minute.
Oh, yeah. Boy, in fact, I could just see Jan punch Ross, actually. I could, never mind, Jan. I'm sure you won't do that. Anyway, one thing I want to say about Jan, he was always really proud of me. When we would go out somewhere, he would hold my elbow, and I'd be a step behind him, in front of him. In front of him, he'd be a step behind me, and he'd kind of steer me with my elbow, whether to turn left or right, because he wanted people to see me first. Yeah, that was really neat.
That's sweet.
And his mother and father both really liked me. And at the senior prom, I had saved up enough of my babysitting money, a silver dollar, every time I went. Anyway, and it got in the way of me going out with Jan. But I had to, and especially because Daddy wasn't alive anymore. So money was really, really tight. But I had saved up enough money to buy fabric to make a new dress, and also a pair of shoes, $12 shoes from Spiegel catalog. And they were silver, and they were high heels. And the fabric that I got was black, but it had a silver sheen to it. And it was Nina Ricci's design. It was a couture design. It was a beautiful dress. I loved that dress. And I had also had just enough money left over to go have my hair done. And that was very rare. Uh, I can only remember as a little girl, even before I was in first grade, my mother would go in every so often to get her hair permanent and cut. She had really thick, beautiful brown hair. And she would drag me along. But there's a story that I probably ought to tell real quickly. Mama would sit in this hairdresser's chair, and it was in this hairdresser's home. And the hairdresser would just make casual conversation, like, how is everything? And how is Hiram? Every woman always asked my mother about Hiram because he was an attractive man. And Mama would say, oh, we're doing just fine. And I'd say, one time, I was not even in school, of course, maybe 4. And the beautician asked Mother how Hiram was. And Mama said, well, he's fine, wonderful. And I said, Mama, you're mean to him. And the hairdresser all of a sudden was all ears. And she says, what do you mean, Helen? And Mama said, Helen, you know that's not true. Well, I said apparently to Mama, Mama, you know that's true. When Daddy comes in for lunch, you beat on him and you make him cry. Well, Daddy was teasing her. And you know, the babies weren't born yet, the twins weren't born yet, or they were and sleeping. And Daddy would come in, and he and Mama, after we'd eat, Daddy would fool around with Mama. Mama would sit on his lap, and they would kiss and smooch and whatever. And Daddy would tease her, and she would say, oh, Hiram, you know, and pretend she was beating on him. And Daddy would go, oh, Helen, your mom's hurting me. You know? And what did I know? But that was true.
Right, right.
And the more my mother said, Helen, you know that's not true. Daddy just comes, we were just playing. No, Mama, you make him cry.
Oh.
The more she said, the more I kept saying, and finally Mama had to drop it. But boy, when we got in the car all the way back to the ranch, Helen, Daddy was just playing. We were just playing. So we were sitting around the dinner table, and Mama couldn't wait to tell, because Daddy had told her how lovely she looked and did she have a nice time and all of that. And it was rare for Mama to go in and have this done too. And so it was always an event. And so Mama couldn't wait to tell Daddy what happened. And that's when I realized that it was just horseplay, you know. But I don't think my mother ever quite forgave me for that, because word got out that little Marlena was mean to wonderful Hiram. I mean, we were talking to the town gossip. Oh, dear. Who knew everybody in town, because she was the only hairdresser in town. I'm sorry, Mama. I'm sorry. Little did I know.
So back to Jan.
Back to Jan. Well, Dad was a little intimidated by him. He knew that Jan was his match. Absolutely. And Jan respected my father, though. He would say, Helen, we need to get you into the house, or your father would get after you and not let you come out with me anymore. And so Jan, when those lights started flipping, Jan also was on call to get me into the house. So, but there were times that my father should be concerned, because those windows steamed up pretty fast. One time I remember too, Jan and I had gone on a date, and we drove past the family house. We had a favorite parking place in Clover Valley, and we could watch the comings and goings of who was on the road and who was coming and going. And And when it was time for us to maybe get me into the house too, and it was up on the hill so we could look down and see who was going. But this time, for some reason, we drove past the ranch house and actually stopped where there used to be a schoolhouse, and it was a schoolhouse where his grandmother taught. And she was teaching there when his grandfather came through with a mule team. He apparently his grandfather had quite a business going, being a freighter to the local town shops and mining camps. And that's where he got his money. In fact, Grandpa Agee ran for governor and missed by the hair of his chinny chin chin, and he was known everywhere. He was the first one in certainly all of Elko County and maybe even in Nevada to get a car. And there's a book written about Wells, and someone had written that because nothing was paved then, so when the car was driving 30 miles an hour, it would pick up dust. And the only one who could do that would be Vance Agee driving his Model T or A, whatever. And they said, you had to get out of the way, because if you didn't, you'd get run over. There was a little bit of Grandpa Agee and Jan. You didn't get in Jan's way either, especially if you crossed him. And at one of the school dances, we were leaving, and in fact, I think it was the prom. And let me finish that. I got my hair done, and I went right after school to get my hair done, but I needed to get back out to the ranch to get dressed. And Jan's father had sold the ranch then, which broke Jan's heart. He had envisioned himself being a rancher, and his father apparently had gotten into a partnership with some bad dudes, and they used the ranch as collateral, and the deal went upside down, and Vance lost the ranch. And Jan was footloose and fancy free for several years, actually. That's when he really danced with, really took on the rodeo, because he didn't know what else to do.
Right.
And it was just before the Vietnam major build up.
Yeah.
Anyway, at the dance, Vance gave me when he sold the ranch, had to sell the ranch, he got a little bit of money, and he bought himself one of those brand new fancy two-tone Thunderbirds. And he let me drive that to the ranch and back again to get Jan to go to the dance.
Sweet.
And when I got to the apartments, the Agee apartments, I went to his folks' apartment and knocked on the door, and Jan was ready, and he looked so handsome. And I, of course, had a boutonniere for him. And he handed me a box with my corsage, and it was a white orchid. And orchids, nobody ever saw an orchid. We just knew that that was the epitome of corsages. And this orchid was gorgeous. It covered my whole shoulder. And that was one time that I felt like a little more than a princess.
Yeah.
Not quite a queen, but really special.
Sweet.
And Jan treated me like that too. They made a big to-do about the dress I made, and you were just really very proud of me, and told Jan to take good care of me. And
Sweet.
It was a special night.
Sweet. That's
and
wonderful.
Jan held me. Do you need to go, honey?
No, we're gonna have to
Hurry?
We have to stop. So can we take a pause? Do you
Sure,
want to finish this
we can
story?
absolutely.
Okay, so we finished with that story? Is that a good place?
Not quite.
Okay.
After the dance,
Mm-hmm.
we were walking out of the school
Mm-hmm.
to his car, and a couple of his buddies, high school buddies, had been drinking a little bit, and with their dates. And Jan and I were ahead of him, and his buddies started teasing him about, well, we know what's going to happen, Helen. You know, Jan, you better unzip your zipper now. And Jan got so mad. Oh, he was furious. I'd never seen him like that before. And we had talked with another friend of his, that we were going to go have milkshakes after the dance and hamburgers and stuff. And he asked Joe and Susan, who you met, to take me. He basically threw me into Joe's arms, and the boys saw, oh shit, we've pushed it too far. And they went running to their car, and Jan was hot after him. And I said, oh, Joe, we got to follow him. And Joe said, yeah, we don't need to have a big fight, because Jan would cream him. We knew he would. And so we followed. There were these kids running away from him. There was Jan, and then there was us chasing him. And then the whole school knew what was going on. And so there was a whole crowd that gathered around two little casinos in Wales. And Jan was already had one by the neck and his arm outreached to plow into him. And these boys were saying, Jan, you know, we were just kidding. Hey, we're your best friends. What was wrong with you? We were only teasing. Da, 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 da. And I said, Jan, it doesn't matter. It doesn't. He says, it does matter. You apologize to Helen. And, oh, we're sorry, Jan, that's all. No, you apologize to Helen. And those boys had to apologize to me. End of story. Except that I was so amazed that Jan would stand up
for you.
For me.
That's right. Well, we're going to do part 2 a little later.